Good morning, everyone. If I can have all the subcommittee members turn on their camera and say hello. We do have quite a bit of public attendees today, so this is exciting. We're going to have some discussion here. But let me run through the subcommittee roll call. Stop sharing my screen here. So that way I can see if we have a quorum of subcommittee members. And then if we do, we can get started. Whoops. Augustine is our lovely chair. I see you're present. James, this is in no particular order, as present. Rachel, you're here as well. I don't see Saguna. So it looks like we'll put her as absent. If she shows up in a bit, I'll mark her as here. And then John Franco, I see you here as well. So we do have a quorum of members. So with that, Augustine, if you want to give a brief introduction about what we're all doing here today. Otherwise, I have a couple of notes for what I'd like to see the committee work on today. For those, oh, that's why. Okay. I've done this, I don't know how many years now, and I never can get it to work quite right the first time around.
No worries.
There we go. Perfect. For those members of the public who are joining and are in the waiting room or who are in the room here with us, if you wouldn't mind keeping your microphones muted, if you can use the raise hand feature, we'll call on you as soon as we can. I don't want to interrupt the subcommittee's discussion on a particular topic, but we do want your input. That's why you're all here, and we hope you can provide us some as we move forward and through this. So, Augustine, why don't you let us take it away?
Cool. Yeah, thank you, Chris, and thanks everybody for joining. I'm excited to get this ball rolling and get some deliverables together for this kind of AI future we're looking at. So yeah, like I mentioned in the ELTAC meeting in Sacramento, what I'd like to see is some sort of framework or guidelines or something to guide the kind of regulated community into how we can effectively use AI and still be compliant and use it kind of right, the right way. The thing I want to make sure that we're careful about is I don't want to stifle innovation, right? I know that this field moves quickly, and I personally am a big proponent of adopting technology early and leveraging it and get things going, but with some degree of caution. So I think what I'd like to see from the group is kind of some framework that can be used today and in the future to kind of outline some, I guess, guidelines on how we can use this better and put in a couple of maybe like a framework for risk assessment, a framework for appropriateness, like an assay for appropriateness for the AI tool that can be relevant with the technology that we have today, but also maybe in 5 or 10 years, how that technology changes and still be useful and relevant. So what I would like from the group is, kind of collaborative effort on what everybody thinks is important, what people think is maybe less important, what people think should be included, and also kind of stress testing this because I'm worried about like putting in something that is too burdensome and is not really applicable in the future. If the technology changes significantly, it's not useful anymore. So I want to have something that is actually going to be useful for the lab community, for the regulated community, for the folks at ELAB, for the people that might want to take advantage of this. So stress testing it would be something that I'd want to make sure that this group can do. And I think the group is diverse enough to be able to do that and see different perspectives. Like, from my perspective, I know the realities of the bench, right? I know what it's like to be a bench chemist and do the work. But getting input from folks that have a different perspective would be also very helpful to make sure that we're not missing anything and we can capture, as much information and make this as robust as possible. I don't know if Chris, you have any other notes or anything that we need to accomplish today.
I think you did a very good job. Oh, perfect. Saguna is here. I'm admitting her into the room now. I think you did a great job setting up the framework and what my hopes for the subcommittee too. With the subcommittee, we want to have something actionable and deliverable to go back to the full ELTAC committee for potential approval, or for them to send it back to the subcommittee and say it needs some work. So for that, I'd like to see some sort of final deliverable.
Yeah. So
However,
I think
you guys want to do it, we can have it structure as like just a list of guidance at the end. If you want to build it out that way, it could be multi-part, right? Guidance, and then, hey, ELAP, we want you to do this specific thing. But if you're going to ask ELAP to do something, I'd like it to be specifically targeted of like, we want ELAP to do this.
Yeah. So for deliverables, I have a list of deliverables that I'd like. So I took some notes and tried to make it as efficient as possible. But the deliverables I think would be ideal for this group is regulatory guidelines for AI use. Just general, some background, some information, some kind of guardrails, what to avoid, what to use, where it's useful. That'd be one thing. The second thing would be appropriateness assay. So an actual test, like I think in the presentation I put together 5 categories, but that's something that the group should come up with, a test to evaluate each tool on a case by case, so that the AI framework, the regulatory guidelines or framework will say, okay, now once you've established your tool, use this assay to see if it's appropriate for use, and if it fails maybe any one of those questions, it's not appropriate, or if it is not acceptable. That'd be the second deliverable, and the third deliverable would be like a risk assessment or stratification kind of framework to be able to put that tool into the right risk level. And in the presentation, I came up with 3 risks of low risk for administrative things, medium risk for like pre-analytical things, and high risk tools for interpretive or analytical tools. So those would be the 3 deliverables that I would like to see. And then essentially it would be ELAP adopting that the guidelines, the AI framework or guidelines or regulatory lines, whatever that is, that would reference those 2 other documents. That's how I would see it as a complete package.
I like that.
Okay. So then for the group, what we need to do is come up with all that stuff. From my perspective, and what we talked about in the meeting, I would say we establish the directives for the framework, for the regulatory guidelines. I came up with the 4, that I thought was good, but this is all just me guessing. So we get to get input from the group of auditability, the deterministic reversibility, the data retention, and the data sovereignty, which would be the 4 things that I think are important. If anybody thinks other things should be added, we include those and put that framework together. And then once we have that framework, then the other things will come later. I think not putting the cart before the horse. So maybe today we can work on that, the guidelines and the framework, and see what people think is important, and then go from there.
All right, I have 2 other procedural things first before we dive into conversing. One is, what kind of timeline do we want to try to put this on? And then frequency of meeting.
So I think sooner rather than later, right? AI is moving pretty quickly. Right. A lot of folks are already using AI tools. I don't think anybody's using it wrong, or incorrectly or dangerously, but you might as well do it sooner rather than later. Like, I don't think this should take 2 years. I'd like to, if we can get it done by the end of the year, that would be awesome, is my goal. So, a couple months. And then frequency of meetings, I don't want it to be a huge lift. I know everybody's busy. Everybody has a lot of other things to do, important things, and I don't want to be hogging everybody's time. But every few weeks, I think would be great. Maybe 3 or 4 weeks in between meetings would be good to touch base, make sure that folks that are working on certain sections have the support they need, and we can compile it all together and get it in front of the full ELTAC soon.
speaking from experience, when you put things on once a month, there's often a lot of forgetfulness of, oh, whoops, yeah, I forgot I was supposed to do that this month. But when you do it on 3 weeks, it's kind of good in between that 2 week, every other week. Okay, maybe a little
much,
bit.
yeah.
Yeah. How does that sound for all the other committee members? Thumbs up, thumbs up. James?
Yep, cool.
Okay, so do you guys want it to be on Wednesdays? Like today?
I think Wednesday morning works for me. I have a standing Wednesday meeting. It was afternoon meeting, so morning is good. Oh, not Franco?
Hi, Chris.
Can you unmute yourself without me prompting? Or
I tried and
it didn't work? Okay.
Spacebar works.
Okay. All right. Well, that's good.
I'll try again the next time I
Yeah.
provide input. I did have just an administrative question about speaking to Augustine's point on asynchronous work in between meetings, and what are the provisions for doing that and limitations?
Yeah. So the subcommittee members here we're bound by the Bagley-Keene rules, so we can work in pairs, but that's it. So once you get more than 2 people working on one item, then we want to bring that forward, have an open discussion, let people comment on it, that kind of thing. So bringing work product back, I think it'd be ideal of just pick pairs. I want to do this with you, and then you guys can meet way more frequently than once every 3 weeks. You can meet every day if that works best for you all. And this provision only applies to the subcommittee members. So everybody here, if you're like, I really want to help with that specific item, we're not going to say no. We can have as many people as you want within reason, right? We want it to be productive. And if we have 13 people working on one item, it becomes a little bit more difficult to schedule meetings in between for discussion of that. Good process though. But yeah, subcommittee members in pairs, and then everything else will come back.
Thanks.
But I guess let me check Wednesdays at 10.
Wednesdays are generally good for me, but looking at my schedule, there are a handful of Wednesdays throughout the year that I have something going on.
Yeah.
But if it's every 3 weeks, then I can hope that it doesn't fall on that Wednesday, I suppose.
Yeah. Okay, we'll pencil it in for Wednesdays at 10. I'll post a schedule on the website of what all those days, and I'll send all the committee members. And then if we need to cancel one in there, we can strike those as they come up. How's that sound?
Perfect.
Good. And then Saguna, you don't have your camera on, so I can't tell if it works for you too.
Yeah, it works for me, except sometimes, like once in 2 months, we would have a standing meeting, and I think 10 is better than 11.
Okay. Wednesdays at 10, once every 3 weeks. Okay, good. So that's the procedural thing. We have a list of items we want to have covered, right? Augustine mentioned we got 3 deliverables we want to tackle. We have our regulatory guidelines, so that's kind of the end product, and then there's 2 subparts to that of actual test you use to say what this tool is on a case-by-case basis, and then some guidance of what kind of buckets those tools always used in, not always used in terms of relative risk. Did I capture that correct?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. And then the risk assessment, I think, is important for something like this that's new-ish, and yeah, just to make sure people are on the same page.
Cool. And then I'm just going to throw this out there as a FYI for anyone who's here in the meeting. If you want to chime in, raise your hand. We'll get to you. So if you're like, I hate this, we want to know. We want to know some ways to make this better. So okay, I think I've covered procedural items. Let me look at my notes to make sure. We talked about making sure this fits within the TNI standard already. in terms of being like something that ELAP would be able to implement, right?
Yeah.
We don't want to make anything that we're not going to be able to do, unless it's going to be here's just guidance to laboratories. Here's
No, I
the
think it should work with the TNI standard. I think my ideal would be something that seamlessly would kind of blend in with what TNI already calls for. So that should be incorporated into the guidelines up front to make sure we're not adding extra things or onerous things or things that go against TNI.
yeah.
So gonna go ahead.
Yeah, just want to chip in. I don't see any major issues here, but my agency has a policy for staff use of generative AI policy. I am hoping that we are not going to create anything that has a discard with that. But I'm just letting you guys know that we do have an AI policy, and there might be items that might come up, and if it is against the policy, then that is something that would be not acceptable.
Perfect. I think that's a great uh, test to run it against. Um, really, you don't have the option to raise your hand? Oh man. Okay. I don't know. Uh, I had to change a couple Zoom things, and so I hope they fixed over that. But Saguna, I think that's a perfect case to test it against. So if you can share it with everybody, that would be ideal. I totally understand if you're not allowed to share the. Um,
Yeah, I can check it, and then I don't see any major issue sharing it, but I will cross check and probably send it to who do you want me to
well,
send it to?
well, I mean, if you can share it with us, you great. But if we make something, if you want to be the guinea pig of like, hey, this gets flagged, we can't do this because of X, or we need to stop here because Y. I think that's a perfect case to test it for to make sure this is a robust system that we have in place that meets the criteria. I will also say I'm going to bring it back and compare it against the water boards. Also has a staff policy use. I'm sure John Franco, you have something similar for your agency, and I know there was a governor directive, and I need to know what it is more more closely than what I'm aware of right now. And I'll try to chime in there too of like, hey, this goes against the governor policy. Is that what you were going to chime in too? Yeah. Okay. So yeah, let's see if we can use ours, leverage ours as well. Ours is fairly generic. It doesn't not really tailored to lab uses.
Yeah, the
So
same as the case for us.
okay,
It is fairly generic to the entire city, and how staff use it. So it's not specifically catered to the lab use either.
perfect. But I mean, that'd be great to fit it in, especially with the buckets. And sorry, Rachel, just chime in. I can't figure out how to get you the ability to raise your hand. Same with the members of the public. If you're like, I can't raise my hand either. I think chat works. I typically don't like using chat because it's not recorded for webcast and recording purposes, and we'd like to have all of that information available. So if you chat, one of us will probably read your thing out as well, but you can use that as well in the everyone chat.
What I was going to say is we do have a draft currently AI policy that is more lab focused, that I am absolutely positive that we can share part of that as well. It's fairly generic, but it's just about guidelines of we can't just go and just choose to do it ourselves. There has to be a process.
We too have an AI policy. I'm looking at it right now, and it seems to be fairly generic, not specific to the lab. But I'll get with our IT folks to see if I can share it.
I think that'd be great if you guys could share them. Would be good as a foundational kind of piece for the guidelines, and build across that. I would like. I know that like Suguna was talking about generative AI specific policies and kind of generic don't or don't, or ask for permission kind of thing policies, which I think are useful. But what I'd like to do is something that's very specific for the lab. So I don't want to bite off more than we can chew. I would just say this is for a very narrow slice of what we do. This is how it should be applied. And then in other places, apply it how your agency, your organization, or company sees fit.
Yeah, and I'd like to add on to that a bit about framing, and it's really important, yeah, to keep that tight scope, but also in terms of trying to keep up with the pace of change and to speak to your point of wanting to have something that's a bit evergreen, I would argue for focusing on maybe identifying what it shouldn't be used for first. And what that does is it keeps us a little bit out of the prescriptive lane, which allows us to be a little bit more evergreen. Of course, there's a balance there because you can do it so you need to make it useful as well, right? So you can't pull back so far that it's useless guidance. But so I'm going to be keeping an eye out for that, just so that we can make sure that it is useful for, longer than, a few months or a couple of years, and also so it doesn't get in the way of people doing new things and new applications.
Just to go on to add to what Gianfranco just said is that I think if we focus on a risk-based framework, this is the risk. This is how the risk must be mitigated. I think that will help us move as the tools move, as opposed to putting in place, you must have this documented, and more along the line of, these are the risks that you need to mitigate in a way that works within your framework. Because every lab too, we're all doing slightly different things in slightly different frameworks, and we need something it's all compliant, but we need something that fits within that way.
Yeah, that's totally the right approach, and I agree. I don't think it should be tool says do this or do that. It should be avoid this and avoid that. Makes it, yeah, like Gianfranco said, a bit more evergreen. So yeah, I think it's perfect. So as we kind of move forward, does it make sense to do that framework first and then put in the risk levels, or does anybody disagree with that? Is there other deliverables that you would want besides the guidance, the risk assessment, and the appropriateness assay? Is there other things that people think we should have?
I am thinking that a guideline for training would be very helpful because, like, even if you consider a general policy, it always refers to complete this training before you know how to use the tools. So, what we need to have on the training, I think, is also important. And that can be one of the deliverables that uh, at this point, I'm not sure how deep we want to go into it, but at least a general guideline of AI training would be helpful.
Yeah, I think it makes sense, especially training on how to use this tool and how to apply the assay and the risk levels. Yeah, I think that's good. But again, I don't want to go too deep on how to do different things because I don't want to lose the plot on the big picture. But yeah, I think a training aspect would be good. I'm not sure who had their hand up first, but go ahead. You guys, Gianfranco or Steven.
Yeah, Stephen Clark with Pacific Icarus. I think the thing to be cautious of, since this is going to be targeted toward the laboratory and specific to training, is if we're going to be compliant with TNI, is to not handcuff or be divergent from TNI. Largely, TNI, with some exceptions, allows the laboratories to define in their quality system how the training is done. So there are cases in the CCR in California where there are specific things in the CCR that aren't in the TNI method that the labs have to comply with. But the more of those that are present, the more complicated it is to manage a laboratory. So alignment as much as possible with the TNI standard. What you can do is give suggestions for training, but not give it so prescriptive that all of a sudden it's something more than TNI. And who knows what that will change in the future. Thank you.
Yeah, I wanted to add on the risk discussion that there is a framework from the State of California Department of Technology, and I'm not endorsing this framework, but I just wanted to bring it to the surface that there is a framework for establishing risk for Gen I already, and there may be some tests in there that we can incorporate or inform our assignment of low, medium, and high risks.
Oh, nice. I mean, that's, I think, a good suggestion. I don't want to reinvent the wheel. So a lot of other industries definitely have looked at this before. We're not the first to do this. So yeah, definitely leveraging what other people have done would for sure be helpful. Cool. Yeah. I think when we get to that risk assessment, that would be a great resource for this. Cool. So then we have the deliverables, then would be a guidelines, risk assessment, preparedness assay, and then some sort of training materials on how to use that. So in the guidelines, I brought up 4 directives that I thought would be relevant. The data sovereignty, data record retention, deterministic reproducibility, and auditability. Is there anything else that people think or don't like? I mean, I'm also, again, these are things that I just, put down on a piece of paper. So if there's stuff that you don't like, that you think should be expanded on or added on more directives, as part of the outline for this effort, now's the time to make those corrections or changes.
Can you run through those again?
Yeah, so I have the first one to me is most important is auditability, right? Which goes with TNI standard. Everything should be traceable and documented, and auditable. So that'd be the priority number one from my perspective. I think everybody should probably agree with that. Then the other ones are the ones that are maybe there's up for debate. The second one I had was deterministic reproducibility, meaning that essentially the stochastic variability on your AI model goes to 0. There's the temperature is 0. That there's no guessing or changing things a little bit from one generation to the other. So doing version control and not learning continuously, having closed learning models would be the second one. I think that also kind of ties into the auditability. You can't audit something that's constantly changing. So having that, I think they're different things, but still related. Then the third one is record retention. This one is something that I don't know how we can do, because it's hard to save a model, right? The models are constantly being changed or modified, and it's not like you can download it right to a flash drive and say, oh yeah, everything you need is in this 14 megabyte file. So that's something that we'll have to maybe discuss a little bit better on how we can make sure that in whatever your entity's data retention policy, if it's 5 years, 7 years, 10 years, that at that point you can still maybe not regenerate that result from your AI model, but still have some sort of record on how it was generated and have it again be traceable and auditable in the future. Like if you're using a model that is supported by one of the big guys, Meta or Grok or Google or whoever it is, and that company no longer exists in 10 years, you can't really have good record retention that way. So I think that's something that would need more massaging to figure out a way that is not handcuffing the industry or folks, but still works with keeping the records. And the last one is something that I'm worried about, and maybe not other people are worried about, is the data sovereignty. Like I'd feel like we need to make sure, at least from a commercial lab standpoint, I know that my customers would not be super pumped to know that their data is being used to train models that's just out there. So we would probably want to put something in place. I think we should, I don't know, maybe not, but something to make sure that data is not out there. It's not in a public cloud. It's not accessible, even though it's slightly difficult to access, but still should be not accessible, and confidentiality should be maintained. And those are the 4 kind of directives that I came up with. Does anybody disagree with any of those?
No, I think those are great. I guess the only other one, and it does kind of fall into the data sovereignty in a sense, but I think we should also at least give maybe a little bit of guidance about cybersecurity, um, and the access to these models that are being used. Again, more under the data sovereignty, but I think there is also always a risk when using any sort of connected tool.
Yeah. And this is a good point that I know that the federal government has a lot of guidance now on cybersecurity that is pretty it's not onerous. I mean, it's very involved, but it's also very prescriptive. So I think we should include something like that, but maybe make it less prescriptive, because again, I want it to be more evergreen. I don't want to say, oh, you must use this specific type of authentication mode, or maybe in the future we're going to use something different. So yeah, but I agree. I think we should have that incorporated in that.
Yeah, I envision it more of a nod to whatever the existing regs are from the governing bodies, because those of us who do DoD work, for example, we have to be compliant to that,
Yeah.
but it's going to change. So yeah, I agree.
Cool. Yeah, that's a good point. Just reference the governing body. Yeah, nice.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I think those are good pillars to really frame, this guidance. I also wonder about how ethics, gets incorporated into here if it needs to, if we need to acknowledge that at all, and kind of what that looks like. But in terms of the going back to the auditability and traceability, yeah, it's going to be impossible to reconstruct the results, right, of these chatbots, whether you have access to the same model or not. And so really thinking about what are we really after there? Do we need to reconstruct the results if given the same prompt? Do we need to prove that it will provide the same output, or is having an audit log of what we gave it and what it gave us, does that satisfy that requirement? And having some information about when that occurred and what model was used. Is that enough? So I think, just trying to think about the feasibility of really keeping a good record of what was done and what those requirements are to sort of satisfy those auditability needs to reconstruct. And I don't know if we're not using AI to generate test results, right? So does it need to meet the same bar as, reconstructing test results, for example?
So I would caution that there are programs and software out there that's actively being sold to laboratories in California where the AI is the one doing the integration and is generating. I mean, it's not generating the result off the instrument, but it is generating the final result, including manual integrations and so forth that an analyst would. So I think in those cases for, that level, I think we need to look at that as one lens versus if we're using an AI bot to write our script that does some automation, do we really have to go to that level of validation when really all it needs is just some human eyes to say, okay, this works? Does that really have to be documented as much? So I think yes, but I think it has to be specific for what the action is. So it's not too restrictive to tools that don't really have an effect on the results.
I think
Yeah.
the bottom line to what everyone has been touching upon is data verification. How is data being verified? Whatever is being done by AI, how do we say that it is the right one? And how do we ethically say it is the right one? And how is it going to be audit proof? So I think that is an important aspect we have to consider is like, how do we verify data? What are the guidelines for data verification? I think that's important with, especially with, like we discussed earlier, I think we are not using it exactly to generate results, but we may be using it to figure out trends, and whatever follow-up conclusions and observations that we are basing off whatever data is non-AI generated. So how do we say that this is the right conclusion? And how do we verify that it is okay? So it looks very broad now, But I think that is one aspect that we probably have to focus on.
I think you hit the nail on the head. I think that's what we want to have here is we want to have something like a before and after. And when we were thinking about this earlier internally of like, okay, where could this be useful and where it couldn't be useful? One of the things that came to mind was, and I'm glad Stephen is here because maybe something is being marketed like this of counting the little tiny Cereodaphnia that are imperceptibly small to the human eyeballs, and having an AI model count all of those things. An audit trail for that would be like a picture or a series of pictures that then you could look at and verify. And so I know this is dusting off my hat because I think it was DoD version 4 back when I was in the lab, but you had a requirement for them to audit a certain number of data packages. Is that something that you guys want to add in there too, of like just like you would do for QA QC of a method, right? You have one QA QC sample per a batch of 20 or so. Is that the frequency that we're looking at, or is it more, right, where you're looking at less?
I think the challenge here versus say, I mean, I'll just use integration because, when we purchase Empower or ChemStation or the like, it is validated. You set parameters and it takes care of the integration, but it's on the parameters you set. It doesn't have the opportunity to change those parameters independently. Still an analyst has to go in and make that decision. I think that the challenge with AI is AI has the ability, most models, to make decisions, and it's being able to continuously monitor where its decision making is made. So whatever it is, it has to be, I would say, periodic, just like you said, but less to a validation and more almost to like a PT. I don't necessarily mean like a PT, but more like you're testing a moment in time periodically to see if there's drift within its decision making capabilities. Because the one risk we always run with AI is some of the models are trained to please. So to a certain extent. So we got to make sure that it's, generating the correct result and not the result it thinks that people want to see.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And I think my perspective is to include that as part of the internal audit. That I think the internal audit should like audit a subset of percentage or whatever of data packages or of that AI process. Now, I do think that probably the most important thing to put into this framework is there has to be a human in the loop. Right? You can't have the model just make decisions and go out and send MCL notifications or not send MCL notifications and like just guess. And you're right, Rachel, because the wise models are built to please, and you can manipulate them. You can kind of gaslight them into doing what you want it to do. So it's important to have that human in the loop aspect of everything needs to be checked. And then I think including something in the internal audit kind of specifications, kind of like what TNI does, right? And say, hey, you must do this periodically with some frequency, and then putting in a percentage or subset or whatever of model of data packages to check would be good. That's a great suggestion.
I have a comment is you had talked about in our previous meeting and earlier in this one, Augustine mentioning the tiers, kind of a low risk tier 1 up to tier 4 high risk. And it kind of sounds like we're trying to hit all those tiers at one time. And I almost feel like, all these, auditability, data retention, all this stuff, maybe it would be better to go through them tier at a time. And then once we get tier 1 worked out, the low risk stuff, it's like, all right, well, what did we learn and how can we apply it to tier 2, crank it up a little bit, and then, because it sounds like with this, AI telling us whether or not our calibration curves are good or bad, or manual integrations, we're kind of we're kind of jumping ahead of the initial tier system that was laid out, and we might end up shooting ourselves in the foot, doing that.
Yeah, good point. That's, I guess, losing the plot a little bit already. But yeah, it makes sense. I think starting with the risk levels makes it easier, instead of starting with like a guidelines. Like, yeah, it's hard to set guidelines if we don't have the risk involved. So yeah, that's great. Let's instead start with the risk levels and categorize those things. I set 3 risk levels because it's easier to do 3 than 4, because the 2 in the middle are always harder to slide into. But yeah, we can do whatever you guys think. I just like the odd number. The 1 in the middle is nice to have. But yeah, I think that makes more sense. And for administrative AI tools, things that help you clean up your inbox, your email inbox, low risk, not a big deal if that goes wrong. And then we can build up from there. I think it's probably the better approach. What do you guys think, in terms of the workflow, so we don't get too lost?
I think that's great. I think if we use this meeting to define what those risk levels are, and then we can dedicate each following meeting to 1 risk level each, so then we can create the final product.
I like that idea. Yeah.
Yeah, that's way better. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. Unless there's something that we're like, oh, this applies all the time, right? If there's one of those, I don't want to lose that and be like, oh no, we'll talk about that later, right?
Right.
If you have one thing that you're like, always, even if you're using AI to clean up your email inbox, you should do this. And
Right.
I think Saguna mentioned earlier about, or no, maybe it wasn't Saguna. Somebody mentioned about data ethics. I think having AI use as part of the lab's annual ethics refresher, I think is a must.
Mm-hmm.
I'm seeing a bunch of head nods, so I'm going to put that down as a must. This is the only one that I have so far.
It's like the tier 1 being the QA manual and the tier 3 being the individual SOPs and forms and all. Let's build the foundation first before we start talking about manual integrations and things like that.
Yeah, I agree. And so for just to add on to what you just said, Christopher, the for the training that Saguna mentioned, I think it's also key to talk about the restraints of AI, what it is and what it is not, because I see there is a tendency sometimes to look at AI as some sort of arbiter of truth, when it's just almost like a really knowledgeable person that thinks really fast. It has biases, it has things. So I think if we can add that just as the baseline, is anyone using AI should be aware of what AI is and what AI is not, and how that has potential effect on ethics and how it's applied.
Yeah, our city policy, just to add to that, our city policy starts with the responsible and ethical use of generative AIs. So I guess it's universal.
Perfect. That one's covered. All right. So then let's move through the tier list. I like 3. 3 seems good. If we find out that even 2 is, like, if we're having trouble distinguishing between medium and high, we can have 2 buckets. If we're like, oh, actually, there's a lot more nuance, we can split it up to 4. But I like Rachel's suggestion of let's set up those buckets now. Do you guys want to just come up with like lists of activities before and have that as the framework before we're like, okay, these are the kinds of things that go in each bucket? I'm doing my best to take notes, but we are recording this meeting, so we'll be able to watch it back. Maybe we should use AI to take notes for us, but
No, I could have my AI note taker do the next meeting, so we'll maybe help with that too.
yeah, I know Zoom can sort of kind of do that, but it's not very good or well organized. So yeah, maybe we can include your AI note taker.
Sure, yeah. For the next one, we'll include him, and then we'll get it going. Yeah, I think it's good. I would say let's start with that. Get the risk tiers outlined first, and then we can start working, like James said, from the lowest, the minimal risk one up, and then each meeting we can build on that. So from what I had put down earlier on the risk tiers, I did 3 again because I like having the middle one of the medium risk. But my tier 1 is like administrative tasks. So I put in scheduling of people, of allocating resources, maintaining inventory on reagents and consumables and things like that. Analyzing, energy consumption, where you're using a lot of energy, water, gas, electricity, whatever it is. Things that if like I categorize those as if one of these goes wrong, not a big deal. Like data doesn't get affected. Bad things don't happen. Like if you're using AI to monitor your inventory, and the AI model says, "Oh, you do a lot of stormwater testing, and there's a storm coming, and you need 100 more cases of this reagent, and you buy 100 cases, and the storm doesn't come." Not a big deal. Stuff expires, you throw it away, you use it for something else. Not a big deal. So those kind of things would be the tier one. So the stuff that if there's a negative outcome, like if it goes wrong, nothing bad really happens. I guess the data quality doesn't get affected.
Just to play a little bit of devil's advocate on the inventory, I think, yes, if it buys too much, that's not the end of the world. But if you are supporting a critical water system through micro and it doesn't order and then there's an event and you have to shut down an entire water system because you didn't get the results, there is a higher risk there. So I think, not to get too in the weeds, but I think in that case, we may have to split a little bit to saying what is critical and what isn't.
And we might have to set wide parameters at first and narrow those down, as we go along, with the bacteria materials and whatnot, if it doesn't order by a certain day, don't have the next day be the day that you're in trouble. Have like a month from now be the day you're in trouble, and then tighten that window as it figure it out.
Yeah, I mean, and also with that, I mean, not in mind, really anything in the lab could go, have far-reaching consequences. So it'd be tough to draw the line somewhere. But I think we're going to have to draw it somewhere, because even if you do that allocation, if you grant vacation or PTO time to two analysts that overlap on the same method, and they're the only ones that have IDCs for that method, and something happens, it's always going to be a weird thing. So I think we have to be careful about drawing that line in a place that makes sense, or else then everything's going to be in a high risk tier.
Yeah, there's two parts to risk, right? There's the frequency of occurrence and then the severity of the impact. So are we saying low risk is more frequency based, or is it impact based? Because yes, it could impact those results in that huge catastrophic way, but that's part of the risk category of could it, out of all of the times that it fails, is it gonna fail in that particular way?
How long can you go without it if it fails? Is it less than 2 days? Is it less than a week? Less than a month? If it drops, how long can you go without before it starts affecting operations and data quality and things like that? And that's kind of how we look at risk assessment here, is if you can't go a day, then that's pretty high risk, but if you can go a month, then it's a little bit lower risk.
And I think these are the sorts of tests that, we can add for people to think through this, because while use cases are really helpful for discussion and also providing some examples, we can't anticipate all of the use cases, nor can we navigate them all. So I like thinking about, okay, what's the temporal impact? What's the, operational impact? There's having some prompting questions there for people to be able to evaluate these use cases.
It would almost be nice that there's something like there is in FDA regulated, where there's almost an equation for each risk. And so you don't have to be prescriptive about this one thing, because in every lab it's going to be a little bit different. So to have some sort of equation where if you assign a value 1 through 4, 1 through 5 for every level, and then that adds up to a number, puts you in a category, and then can go from there. So again, we're not being overly prescriptive, but for each lab can make a model that's based around their own needs.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to implement it, and again, make it easy. We want to make the tool easy for people to use. So that's yeah. I think that makes sense. Any other ideas that we can include in that minimal risk kind of category from your guys' perspective?
I may perhaps, and again, it's hard to define these things, but perhaps adding something like direct impact versus an indirect impact, because they're indirect impacts, there are too many to number, right? And we all play in that space as we worry about what can happen, but perhaps that helps. Some of that language helps.
That's a good point. Because the ordering not enough supplies is an indirect impact. You're right. And direct impact would be calling something non-detect when it has a detection without intervention. Yeah, I think that's a good way to frame it. Direct versus
If I
indirect.
summarize by saying what we're talking about for low risk are all auxiliary operations. They're not directly tied to a specific result.
Yeah.
Does that describe it?
I would say that it strictly has to be stuff that is not tied to a result.
Yeah.
For the tier 1 kind of thing.
If it doesn't work, it does not affect data quality or integrity
Exactly.
or anything like that.
Yeah, it's more like operational items, you know.
Yeah.
Things that impact efficiency, but not the integrity of the results.
I like that. Things that impact efficiency.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So if I could, before we move on to the rest, if I could set like the homework assignment for our next meeting to kind of get the ideas going, is if you guys independently could come up with your questions, like John Franco said, questions, probing questions on assessing what risk this would fall into, that would be great. So as we talk about these different tiers, we can kind of start sliding these questions in and then refine those at the next meeting. Would be awesome if that works. Sorry to give you guys homework.
I think there needs to be a mandatory homework component to all
Yeah.
of this for everybody.
So.
I don't think folks here can get away with not having any homework. So
yeah, there won't be an exam, but homework yes. So
well, I think it'll be a nice way too for us to all organize our thoughts, be able to present them to each other, and potentially even. And you guys can disagree. Should we be sending this out before the meeting to be able to look through different people's perspectives on it so we can discuss, or is this something that has to be discussed at the meeting? Christopher, I'm not sure if there's any sort of legal component around that.
We have to discuss it at the meeting, but there isn't a prohibition from sending it as long as it's available to anyone who wants to comment. So if you have something you're like, I absolutely want everyone to share this, we can post it on the webpage. Or I might be able to do it where the Zoom registration gives you a packet. I'm not 100% sure if I can do that or not. It might be something that has to be posted. So
that might be too much work. I was just trying to think of a way to make it a little bit more efficient in the meeting.
Yeah.
So I think. Yeah, I think I thought about this too, and I think we could, right? If let's say Rachel has her list and she sends it to me, it's a 2-person collaboration. I compile it into one document that John Franco sends me his, and Jansen, and do it that way and combine it into one. I combine it into one document and have that as what we present at the meeting.
Yes,
would that
as
work?
long as you're not talking back to everybody.
No, I'm just receiving and then compiling.
If you're just collecting all this stuff, then yeah, that works.
Okay, yeah. So let's do that. Maybe we'll say a couple days before the meeting. We can get that, and then I'll put it all together and we'll talk about it at the meeting. Cool. And then so going back to what we were talking about, sorry, the tier 1 requirements I would have thought. So I think we should have again the categorization, so the questions, and you try and get them into those tiers, but also what kind of requirements or regulations or requirements we should have for that. So for like the tier 1, it should be something that would be minimal cybersecurity type safety things, basic IT documentation, maybe doesn't need SOPs, doesn't need anything specialized, or doesn't need validation, right? I think for stuff that affects data quality, we have to validate the AI tools, but for tier 1 stuff, maybe stuff that would not need to be validated. Anything else that you guys think that maybe we can put in as a requirement, do or don't for tier 1 things?
I'm
Where does
seeing tier one as like general policy, like James said earlier. Like this is the your general policy on AI use. Anything tier one should be able to be covered by that. With some exceptions, right? If you're using it in a very specific way for scheduling, right? You want to have an SOP on how you do that. But I see that as like the bare minimum quality manual kind of thing.
What about confidential information? And that information, so the state looks at anytime there's confidential information involved at sort of by default elevates it to a moderate or high risk. I know that doesn't really mesh with the laboratory because a lot of these back office operations are involving, some client information and emails and stuff like that. So there may be a disconnect or misalignment between those risk levels, but I did want to just mention it.
If
Yeah,
we
so
take the
from
different
go ahead.
if we take the different risk levels through these steps that Augustine mentioned earlier, like a checklist of accountability, data retention, data sovereignty, and the each tier might not be applicable, to all of these steps, but the ones that they are applicable to, you apply it. And the data sovereignty, you go per tiered. Is this applicable to data sovereignty? And if it is, then you write it into the framework, and then move on to the next tier. You address each of these per tier, and by the time you get to the third tier, you've probably got them all covered. But the first one might not be applicable. It might be, depending on how we set it up.
So I'm picturing a big matrix table. It's
Yeah.
like tiers at the top and then all of the elements that we have down the side, and then each one's got a little box that's like yay, yes, no, kind of green check mark, red X kind of thing.
Mhm.
Is that what you're picturing, James?
Yeah,
Yeah.
something like that.
Yeah, that makes sense. And then to the point of the confidentiality, and I guess that's the disconnect between a public entity and commercial lab. Everything we do is confidential, like like 100% of it. So nobody gets to see anything. So that is, I guess, goes without saying. So that's where there's a little bit of a disconnect for sure.
Yeah, I'll say that kind of fits in with the standard where it's like everything, all records must be held secure and in confidence. It doesn't really explain what
Yeah.
those
I think it is
parts
spelled
mean.
out in the P&I about stuff
Yeah.
like that.
Yeah. So, yeah, I'll stop there. We'll talk about that later.
Yeah, I think what we can do is we can just reference the TNI standard or like the relevant standards and just include it by reference and do it that way. Again, I'd rather not reinvent the wheel. If somebody else has that covered, we'll defer to what they do. And as they update it, we'll just keep it going. Cool. So if there's nothing else for tier one, which I think like Chris mentioned, it's going to be easy, basic stuff, not critical. Tier two is where I think it gets a little hairy. That's where I would get a little more nervous from what I had thought about before. So the examples that I had for tier two is stuff that is pre-analytical work. So it's stuff that we need to work before we do the analysis, but maybe is an indirect. It indirectly affects the results. So the two examples I had was using like natural language processing to interpret a chain of custody. If a customer writes a COC, they say I want these tests, these are the sample sites, sample time, sampler, or whatever. Using an AI model to read it, interpret it, and put that into the LIMS. Again, the risk is higher there because if you get it wrong, you log in the wrong analysis, it doesn't get processed in time, and then that sample is out of compliance, or things could happen semi-indirectly. That would be not ideal. So there's more risk there. Same thing with like if you use this an AI tool to predict instrument maintenance. If you're using it to predict like your tune frequency or your preventative maintenance on a mass spectrometer, and it doesn't do it right, and it says, oh, you go ahead and keep running, but it's not in spec, it could potentially affect the data quality at that point. Obviously, you have other checks, you have QCs and batch QCs, sample QCs, all that stuff. But there could be knockdown effects. Again, not directly, but indirectly, that would affect the data quality. So that's where it gets a little bit more. It touches customer data, it touches results, it touches samples, but not manipulates the results. That's kind of how I define that tier 2 medium risk. And then for that, I think that you'd have to have better policy, especially for confidentiality, because now you do have customer data or potentially confidential data, so you can't be using it to train broadly accessible models. You have to have version validation, maybe AI or AI tool validation to make sure that it works the same. That kind of stuff is what I would picture with that tier 2. But that's the one that was a little bit more amorphous. It's a little bit hazy for me on where we draw the line between medium risk and higher risk for that stuff. What do you guys think for risk levels on that?
I agree. And I would add items like automations almost to, for like how, importing data, calculation sheets. There is a review process, so it's a little bit less high risk as something that's completely automated. But yeah, anything that sort of indirectly affects data, but that is not directly making a decision on it.
Yeah. So you're saying it's basically this tier is for things a person could do but isn't.
Yeah, but is not like manipulating the result.
Right. Things a person could do but isn't directly tied to the specific number at the end.
Yeah.
Well, sort of.
Maybe it's indirectly.
Like automations of like pieces of a task.
Yeah, so it gets a little hazy. It's harder, I think, harder to define because you can always take it one step further and a little step further, and all of a sudden it's doing the whole process. So drawing that line, I think it's pretty easy to draw a line between tier 1 and 2, right? Low risk to medium risk, but that medium risk to high risk is where it gets a little bit harder to define. So I think that's maybe something that we can do as homework for what kinds of examples. I think if maybe that'd be the move. We just put in a bunch of examples. This I think is medium risk, this is high risk, and then kind of slide those together and say, okay, well, this crosses the boundary of higher, medium, whatever. Do it that way if that works.
So my niece likes to make like tier levels of her favorite songs because she's 13. But something like that is what I envision. Like, the team going away and going, these are the items that fit within here, and then we can kind of hash out where they all stand within reason, like not getting too in the weeds, but sort of the class.
Yeah. And I think that the final, the deliverable shouldn't say these are the specific use cases for each tier. It should still be broad, and we should have the probing questions. Hey, if you say yes to these questions, it's probably medium risk. If you say no to these, it's low risk, and do it that way instead of saying, if you're specifically processing the very specific task, make it a little bit more evergreen, which I love that term. So it's good. Thanks, Ranka. Thank you.
More of a list of questions to answer for each one. And if it checks those boxes.
Yeah.
Like I mentioned earlier, this is kind of how we do risk assessment here, is that it's like, 1, how long can you do without it? And 2, what is the impact? Rate the impact 1 through 4 or whatever. Like disastrous, whole cities go without safe drinking water, or and how long can you go without it? So it's like you kind of like multiply those 2 factors, for like a risk factor or something like that. And is that risk factor less than 5? Then it's tier 1. Is it between 5 and 10, or something like that? I have a numerical value to.
I know Rachel had the FDA formula. Is it any good? Because can we just copy a wholesale, or not really?
I'm gonna go back and revisit my past and take a look at it, but I think we could actually modify it slightly. It's minor, major, critical is how it puts out, and what it does is it asks you a series of questions that you rate from 1 to 3, and then you add them up, and then that number is is this a critical event? Then you have to do A, B, and C. Is this major? I think we can do that within this by just asking those questions. What does it touch? What's the impact? As James said, how long can you go without it? And then that could add up. So yeah, I'll pull that up and send that to Augustin. I just got to dig back into my pharmaceutical past.
Yeah, and for context, I would also add the Gen AI risk assessment framework. It's SIM 5305F, and I'm not endorsing it, and it is not a plugin for this situation, but it does have quite a bit of information that I think could be tuned to the laboratory environment, especially when dealing with the chatbots. Like, for example, there's a lot of focus on safety, but that I think we could interchange for maybe client data quality or something like that in terms of the tiers. And again, there won't be a perfect match, but I think there is some thought-provoking, reference material there.
Yeah, I think that's great. I'm a big believer in not reinventing the wheel, so I think we can incorporate aspects of what other people have done for sure better. Cool. And then for the last tier, the highest risk is going to be the stuff that directly touches customer data, like Rachel mentioned. There are vendors out there that are pushing, total packages that will do everything for you, that you just, let it connect to your instrument and walk away, and then gives you the results. It gives you everything, which to me is very scary. So that would be the kind of thing that would be the highest risk. So interpreting, MS data, doing peak integrations, even things like Chris mentioned, counting fish or like by colony counting on a HPC plate for micro. If the camera you're using, the computer vision is way better, has way better eyesight than a human, you're going to be overcounting things compared to what a human can count. So setting thresholds and limits and just being able to audit that and validate it is going to be important. So for that, the requirements I think should be way more strict, way more robust for the validation, the auditability, data retention, all that stuff. Like, just has to be just more rigorous in general. And that's where I don't want to, I don't want to say you can't use it. Like, that's why I think we have this effort to say, yes, you should be able to use it, but put in the appropriate guardrails for this. And then again, as the technology gets better, the framework that we establish should allow for that technology to get better and make the validation less difficult. And I mentioned, I think in the last meeting, but I remember when I learned chromatography, I had to cut peaks out on a strip shot recorder and weigh them. That was the way. And it wasn't that long ago, but when computers started measuring the curve, I'm sure there was a lot of doubt. It's like, well, how can I be sure? What's the number? You can't weigh this. We're just trusting that the computer is going to integrate that peak and calculate the area correctly. But eventually that's the way. Nobody weighs peaks anymore because it's way too hard and it has way more error than the computer measuring that. But we need to be able to, I think, write these requirements so that as technology gets better, we don't have to worry about those kind of weird things. It'll adapt to that. So this is going to be, I think, the hardest one. It'll be easy to categorize, but hardest to put in the requirements for.
And I think in these cases, the biggest risk there is drift, right? Like back in the old days, it was, is the model correct? Is the equation correct? And we would have to do the same calibration, weigh it, and have the software do it to show the auditor. But now we don't have to do that. So I think it's creating for those particular things a framework that we may have to do for a while and then eventually drop off. But I think the difficult thing is finding that general language so it's not too prescriptive. So I would just say something along the lines of, we're going to have to come up with a validation framework and a frequency for auditing and validation that can, and maybe even write in, it has to be reevaluated every X many years or whatever. Because right now, these are all so new, we don't know what the drift is within the models.
Yeah, that makes sense. And maybe putting in guidance of if you check this every month, for example, and it doesn't change after 12 months, then okay, maybe check it every 3 months or 6 months or whatever it is, and have that frequency increase as the technology gets better. But yeah, you're right. The drift is the or the learning, I guess, the is what we want to call it, but is the critical thing, because if you're using a piece of software that integrates a peak that always looks for the same thing. It's a math equation that looks for the slope change of X number, and it starts integrating there no matter what. That's easy. It's not going to drift. But if you have something that is learning continuously, like let's say you have a system that is always integrating, always learning, and it looks at the retention time for a certain peak, and it's always 22.5, and it never changes. So the software, if it's learning, it's like, oh, my acceptance range is getting tighter and tighter and tighter because the RSD goes down, and it's always 22.5. And then all of a sudden you get a source water sample that is really dirty and has carryover effects, and then that peak drifts by 0.1 minutes, which is outside of the scope. After it learned, it's a false negative. So those kind of things are the things that we need to check or put guardrails on, so that it does do it the same every single time. So being able to minimize learning or close the learning model and do it that way would be helpful, or important to put in there.
And if we treat this like TNI wants you to treat controlled documents, I mean, at the end of the day, when this is all said and done, it's going to be a controlled document.
Mhm.
And if we're taking it through the evaluate, audit, corrective action if needed, and everything process like you would any controlled document, then
Yeah.
those kind of things would come out during the audits. They'd come out when that one sample screwed up the calculation, and you have to
Mhm.
look at it and reevaluate. If you take the TNI process like it's supposed to be done in that way, then
Yeah.
just treat it like a controlled document. Make it a controlled document, treat it like one.
Yeah, that's a good point. And just lock it and say, okay, now you finalized it, get a version number, and that's it. It doesn't change. Yeah. And then that makes it work well with the TNI framework, because I ultimately want to make sure that doesn't step on any toes, right? That this is not going to be an extra thing that people have to do, that it just works in sync with other standards.
Yeah, and I think it does. I think we can fit in the control of data clause in TNI to or provide the how to for an AI system. Just extend the clause that's about your automated systems or your computer systems for validation.
Yeah, I think that's perfect. So anything else that you guys think for tier 3 that we need to look at or worry about?
I'm gonna poke the hornet's nest and talk about data security, because a lot of these models, they only get better when you give it more data. And I don't want to write something that prevents data from being used, but then at the same time, I don't want, if I was the water system and you're testing my water, I don't want my number going outside of the people that I know it's going to, right? Particularly if you're using it for like, oh, we're doing this crazy treatment process that's not part of our water chain, and it's not being delivered to anybody. We're testing this treatment technique. I don't want that number going out there and saying, oh, well, I found this number in this data model. Look at how bad this water system was at this time. It's like, well, yeah, but that was my system. So I don't want to say that it has to be like a locked and controlled system, like it has to be done on house in-site using local hardware, because I think the instrument manufacturers would not be super thrilled with that, as I'm sure they want all of their data to make their models better. So I guess the question I would have to you all is like, how would you keep that security component in there for these kinds of things?
I mean, and everyone feel free to disagree, but I feel like somewhat though, at least from the commercial lab standpoint, a locked model is actually more beneficial, because for example, I'm just going to say you have a chatbot that has all your SOPs, so an analyst can ask a question. You don't want that chatbot to have access to other people's SOPs. You want that chatbot just to know what you've told it, so it stays within your system. And I think that's the same thing for a lot of these So I don't think it's unfair for us to put some sort of guidance out there that it may be more favorable to have these types of models. I know from a cybersecurity standpoint, because we do deal with confidentiality, all of the tools that we even use, just even for things like email, they have to be locked in within our organization. We actually do not allow any data to get fed into anything that's not locked down. So while I don't want to restrict, I do think that it's not without outside of the realm of what we're doing to make those types of recommendations. Just because the quality of what you're doing will actually improve in some ways.
I think that I don't recall as to what detail it goes into in TNI about this, but I believe there's an excerpt in there somewhere. But what TNI doesn't specifically spell out, I have found it's kind of left to the organization to they're vague for a reason because they want you to define it. And whether it's defined in your QA manual or in your SOPs, or maybe if your lab is part of a bigger company like mine is, they have their own policies, your security policy, your IT policy. But as long as each organization, whether it's a commercial lab or whether it's a bigger utility, as long as it's defined somewhere as to what the security is and what the boundaries are and how it's to be used and whatnot. That's how, when I'm trying to update based on TNI and I find something's a little bit vague, that's usually what I find is the reason is because they want you to define it. Just make sure it's defined. Don't leave your definition vague.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, the TNI sort of policy is you need to have policies and procedures to ensure the protection of its customers' confidential information. So that's the directive. So how you do that is up to you. But from the Gen AI case, what that actually looks like is having, a sandbox where either that's through the company that runs the equipment, or whether it's the company that's running the dock control system that you have, or wherever that sort of information is living, it has to ensure the confidentiality. So in Gen AI, typically it's you have an enterprise license, you have an enterprise tenant, and that information store is not retrievable by others through distillation attacks, through leaks. Now, of course, software is not perfect, right? There's always a risk of leaking and breaking that, but having the policies and procedures and those safeguards in place to the best of the ability or guarantee of the software company, whoever's managing that, I think that's sort of the standard. I think going beyond how we define that, maybe we put it in terms of this is how you would mitigate that risk, right? And you would have a sandbox, you would have some sort of isolated environment for that use or storage of that data. Something like that, I think could work.
I agree. I mean, requires a little bit of trust, right? That in the software vendors, but yeah, I think that's the way you have to trust at some point. So yeah.
I don't know about you guys, but our cybersecurity folks are really, really serious about their jobs. I mean, there's nobody getting in, and they've got all their if I don't care who wants to come audit us all the way up to the FBI, then it doesn't matter. They're not gonna,
Mhm.
and I think with any public utility, and I imagine it's the same way with commercial labs, but definitely with public utilities, it's probably about the same.
Yeah, I mean, the risk there is not that some bad actor's going to get in; it's that you're going to open the door and let the Trojan horse in, and and say, here, have all this data. I think that's the risk that we have to be more concerned with. But yeah, I agree. I think the IT folks in a lot of our industry are very serious about it, especially, where most of our currency is data, right? We don't have a physical product for somebody to steal. We have data that somebody could hijack or ransom or whatever. There's a lot of bad actors out there for sure. So having that be robust is good.
And I think that's more of where well, at least in recent history, that's where I see the bigger concern is the hijacking and the loss of data, not necessarily the stealing of it.
Yeah. But then in terms of the confidentiality, that's, you're inviting it in with these models. So, or inviting a potential issue there with these models. So yeah, you're right, being careful about that stuff is going to be important for sure.
If it falls within your company's cybersecurity policies, it's not like my company sharing our AI stuff with your company. Everything's going to be within our own little prison, and your company will define what that prison is. And if if something gets through that shouldn't have gotten through, then it needs to get addressed by the company.
Yeah, but I don't know if we can say that. I'm sure that every IT system would say, oh, it needs to be air gapped, it needs to be totally isolated and run everything local, but that's not practical. And it's not practical today. Maybe it is in the future, but today probably not. So building that into, having a vagueness, like James mentioned, building that vagueness into this framework so that the end user can define it going forward is probably the move. So that it adapts to as things change and be more flexible. So I think that's pretty good on the tiers. If anybody has anything else, we could talk about it. But I think what I'd like, if you guys don't mind, for the next meeting is, if you could work on those tiers, essentially maybe give some examples, but it'd be more of posing the questions of what types of questions answered yes or no would correlate to which risk tier. I like 3. If it seems like 2 is better, I think we can kind of flesh that out based on the questions. So if we put all your questions together, I'll consolidate all of them, and then at the next meeting we say, hey, look, this really looks like it condenses to 2 tiers, not 3. We can do that. I don't need the middle one. I like having the middle one, but I don't need it. So we can make it work with just 2 or whatever makes sense for the questions. Any questions on that task for the next meeting?
I'm just curious if would it be Augustine or would it be Christopher who sends us the meeting notes for this meeting, or we go back and look at the video recording?
Well, I have the recording. I have notes myself. I can send them to Augustine, and he can smush everything together to make one document that everyone says, yeah, this is basically what we talked about. Okay. I'm thinking just in terms of like organizational strategies, right? We do kind of need, if we're going to make one deliverable, we do kind of need one pilot. And Augustine is the chair. You're going to be that pilot unless somebody else really wants to take that on, because I don't think he needs to be the pilot, but I think he's well positioned to be one. So
I'm happy to do it unless somebody else would rather do it. No, you don't have to volunteer all at once.
Have at it.
Yeah. No worries. Yeah, I'm happy to. I think it works. It's easy enough to compile everything, and then we'll get it all into one document, and you guys can take a look. Yeah, that works. So yes, if you want to.
For other people that are watching or in the meeting, I know we have a webcast going too, and so folks who are just interested in just watching and maybe not commenting, I'd like to encourage you to maybe come to the next one with some examples too. We want to hear examples from everybody. While we have a nice diverse group here in the subcommittee, definitely not all inclusive of everything. And I'm looking at Stephen's name as a nice outlier for a different kind of lab, because ideally we'd like to have this apply everywhere. So if you got examples of activities specific to bioassay where you can provide us some examples. We all appreciate that. I know that for sure.
This is the quintessential example of being careful of what you decide to log into, right? Yeah, just for everybody, that's serving on this subcommittee. My laboratory is a aquatic toxicity testing and bioaccumulation testing lab. The reason I'm, participating today or listening in today was more out of curiosity, for a couple of things. One, happy to hear you're talking about guardrails and a framework versus prescriptive instructions, because this AI world is ever changing. And so I wanted to make sure that there was, that type of forethought being put into it. I assume there was, and happy to hear it. And then from a toxicity testing laboratory standpoint, as Chris indicated, we're an observational based science. There aren't instruments yet that are effective at doing this science that can replace a human. Even if there were to count organisms, there still has to be some, process mechanically to move them, renew the water. And so I'm not sure we're ever going to get to a point where artificial intelligence replaces the human element of our science, until robots become really, really inexpensive. So I probably will be listening in on as many meetings as I can, but I'm not. I don't have anything to add functionally, because it's just not something we're doing. Would love to. If y'all have ideas, shoot them my way. But because labor is getting more and more expensive in our state. But that's kind of why I'm involved today or listening in today. So
We really appreciate you coming in too. So
Yeah,
you
for
can
sure. And
always shoot things by us if you're thinking, how would this fit in a laboratory like ours? But yeah.
yeah, it's very helpful. I think that the subcommittee does not need to be made up of ELTAC members. So it's great to have members of the public and other interested folks. So even, folks listening on the webcast or other folks on the call, please send me your notes. If you want to do some homework, please send them my way, and we'll incorporate all comments and try to get as much representation as possible. Because I think like Chris mentioned, we have a diverse group, but definitely not covering every aspect of this industry, and folks that may have very specific use cases like Stephen, that we just aren't aware of or not familiar with would be welcome. And I think, Chris, you can share my email, or if you could send them to Chris and he could send them to me, whatever's easier.
yeah, we can do that too. I was just thinking procedurally. I'd like to be able to give everyone the option for the notes that get compiled. It'd be ideal to share those and post those. I can't guarantee that they're going to get posted before the next meeting every time. Especially if Augustine gets 400 emails from a lot of folks that they're not going to be there, but we will discuss them at each of the meetings, right? So even if it's like we're a month or two behind, or I guess we're on 3-week cycles, so 6 weeks behind or whatever, I think it'd still be good to have kind of a general overview of the notes. Let's try that AI recorder. Let's see how that works.
Sounds good. Yeah.
Next meeting we can talk about that. See if they're any good. I always there was somebody I was listening to. They were talking about AI makes easy tasks easier, like remembering, what we talked about this specific thing in this meeting. What was it? And then the AI can pull it up.
Yeah.
Because it knows it's looked at all that, but then it makes hard things harder, right?
Yeah, exactly. That's probably the best explanation of the AI for sure. So yeah.
How many phone numbers does everybody actually know?
Right.
I think I know 2.
Yeah.
But I can tell my phone to call whoever I want to.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that kind of thing. Okay. So we got some homework. It looks like the next meeting, and I'm not wrapping up now. We're covering action items. So I'm going to cover procedural action items. Looks like the next meeting is going to be slated for July 29th at 10 a.m. Sound good?
Yep. That works.
So you guys all have until the end of July. The next meeting notice will, hopefully I can repost the same one that we had this time around and post it immediately. Webpage will take a little bit to get updated, so expect by the next week sometime. Website will be updated with the list of meetings of potential things. I may or may not be able to do all of them through Zoom at once. I don't know yet, so I'll get back to you on how that's going to work. And then if we need to move one or cancel one or do something like that, then I'll let you all know too. Homework for everyone. Everyone needs to bring questions where your operations would fall into the buckets of the tier list. Anyone who's got notes sent to Augustine for compilation. And then that's a repeat of the same thing. Have examples for the next one. And Rachel, you're going to come back with the FDA framework for whatever the risk-based thing is. And then John Franco, I know you talked about I think it's Department of Technology, SIM 5305F. I'll look for that too, but if you have that available to share, that'd be great. Assuming we can share it. I don't.
Yeah, public.
Right, yeah. So if you have that too, that'd be great to send along as well. So more things. Yes, go ahead, Suguna.
This is just an idea that I want to put out, but if it's not agreeable, I'm perfectly fine with it. I was thinking when Augustine compiles everything, is it okay if you could assign certain areas to certain people? That way we just have like focus group instead of all of us trying to work on everything. Given the time that it's going to take amidst everything else that we do. So we have like focus areas, we can just focus deeply into certain aspects of it and come back for the next meeting. Would that be okay?
Yeah, I think so. I think I agree. I think it's not a good use of resources to have everybody work on everything. What I'd like to do is get kind of the groundwork done and have everybody contribute a little bit for this first step. And then the next meeting, we'll say, okay, now that we have this dialed in, we'll send maybe groups of 2 or 1.5, or maybe 3 people do 2 things to lighten the load. Because yeah, it's going to be too much, I think, to have everybody do everything. But the groundwork, I'd like to get as much feedback as possible, and then start assigning those if that makes sense, to make it just as robust as we can up front, I guess.
Sounds good.
But yeah, it's a good suggestion, or else it's going to be overwhelming for everybody, and I don't want to give people so much homework. So
Yeah, so the next meeting, we're going to all, with the examples that folks are having, we're all going to agree that the tier list that we made here is good.
Mm-hmm.
And then the next step is focusing on that framework of like, okay, now that you have these tiers, here's all the items you need to check and what item you need to do with each tier. Is that correct?
That works, yeah. And for that framework, I think I'd also like to make sure that people are okay with the 4 kind of pillars that I had discussed. If people have other ideas, would be I don't need like tons of input there, but like other ideas you might have for important pillars to focus on as we start building it out would be beneficial, or welcome at least.
And those pillars are auditability, data sovereignty.
Mm-hmm.
That one might need to change.
It's a weird word. I couldn't get a better one than that. Yeah.
Reproducibility, right? And then record retention.
Yep.
So
those are the ones that I had. So if other people have other ideas, yeah.
I added one here of ethics, like ethical use. I think what we might need to do is we might need to have like a platform of like, this is the minimum for everything, and that applies across the category, and maybe less so up at the top. So I think that's something we can just hash out in the next one of like, what's the platform? What are all the things that we're going to say those apply regardless? Right, because reproducibility, do you really care if it's reproducible for scheduling staff?
Sure, makes sense. Yeah.
So that I see as a pillar, but versus like ethical usage, yeah, we want
makes
that
sense.
So yeah, we can discuss those, and obviously there's going to be some sort of kind of overlap between all these categories. I
Yeah.
feel like that's just the realm that we all work in. Is an environmental lab. It's full of a bunch of rules and buckets, and then a lot of the exceptions to those buckets. I don't
Yeah.
think there's anything that doesn't have an exception. So I don't see this being any different. But okay, and that's the focus for next meeting: is agree on the tiers and agree on the framework pillars.
Yep, that would be great. And if you guys wouldn't mind getting it to me by like Monday the 27th, that way I have Tuesday to put them all together.
Are you okay with your email address being posted?
Yeah.
We can do that on the website. That should be easy.
I'm sorry. Quick question. Did I miss this? So your meeting notes Augustine is gonna come to us before the 27th?
If
Yeah,
we can.
so yeah, I'll do my best to get them out sooner. So for the short term, for sure the homework assignment, we're talking about it now. So I hate calling it a homework assignment, but I don't know how else to say it. But that will go on now, and I'll work on getting the meeting notes. I know Chris been taking good notes. I took very weak sauce notes, so I will rewatch the video and get some notes together and hopefully get them out to you soon.
Thank you. I don't mean to be mean about it, but I'm really bad at taking notes.
I'm terrible at taking notes now. So what I actually might do is have the note taker watch the video. I'll try that and see how well that works compared to manual note taking. So
Yeah, let's try that.
It's not homework, it's progress, suggestions, and comments.
yes,
Yeah.
I like that better.
I always call them action items.
Action items is good, yeah.
We didn't get any written comments, but I do want to open the floor if there's anything that anyone here wants to chime in on, of like, even if it's not related, of like, oh, actually you guys also need to consider this idea too. This is an opportunity to do that as well. We always want to make that opportunity available for any member of the public. But you guys should be free to unmute yourselves. And if you don't have any comments, that's totally fine too. We'll just assume silence means you have nothing else that you want to add. All right. Is there any other items that we want to cover today?
I think I'm good for what I wanted out of the meeting and set the action items for the next meeting. So I'm good to give everybody 20 some minutes back of your day.
I'll look at we got no written comments. So, okay. Well, thank you very much for participating. I think this was really productive. I think we have a good idea of framework. We're going to try to get this done. The next ELTAC meeting will be in November. So if it's not done by November, then hopefully it'll be done by the end of the year, and we'll go to the next meeting on top of that. But the goal is to get it done by the end of the year with a 3-week schedule. So hold it, everyone.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
Yeah. All right. Look forward to seeing everyone on the 29th.
Sounds good. We'll see you. Thank you again.
All right. Take care, everyone.
Bye.
Have a good one.